thanking all of you and the IBS and the BCA for holding this wonderful memorial event in honor of my father, Taitetsu Unno. Especially special thanks go to the president of IBS, Reverend Dr. David Matsumoto, and to the dean, Reverend Dr. Scott Mitchell, to the entire IBS, to Reverend Dr. Daijaku Kinst for producing such wonderful students, to Bishop Marvin Harada for his great leadership of the BCA. Congratulations and thanks to Reverend Aki Rogers and Reverend CJ Dunford for your great work, your great contributions, as well as your future promise. I'd like to share a few thoughts and a few recollections of my father. And I think the way that I would like to frame this is in terms of 3 points. What you know, what you do, and who you are. Or to slightly rephrase it, I would like to say, it's not what you know, but it is what you do. And it is not what you do, but it is who you are. And I think that my father would deeply appreciate the excellent presentation given by Reverend Dr. Kenneth Tanaka, because he has great knowledge, so we can certainly recognize what he knows. But I think the emphasis of his presentation was not so much how much you know or what you know, but one could say, how is the great compassion understood within Shin Buddhism activated? And for that reason, what you do is more important than what you know. But ultimately, it is not just individual actions that can garner public or obvious recognition, but it is often the hidden actions of the day-to-day work, whether one is a scholar, a layperson, a minister, or in some other capacity. And it is in all of these capacities that Reverend Dr. Ken Tanaka has worked tirelessly on behalf of Shin Buddhism and the Buddha Dharma. And so the result is not only what he knows, but more so what he has done, and not just what he has done, but who he is as a person. And I think my father, Taitetsu Unno, would deeply appreciate the person of Reverend Dr. Tanaka. I think my father would also deeply appreciate that there is a connection with Senshin Buddhist Temple here. Some of the people in our audience are from Senshin, but of course Reverend Aki Rogers is from Senshin Buddhist Temple, where my grandfather, Enyo Unno, was a minister, and where my father and my uncle were both ministers. And so it's a special joy, I think, on behalf of the Unnos, that we have that connection. But there's another connection here as well, which is that my father's path in Buddhism was to be primarily to understand Buddhism as a vehicle. Shin Buddhism is Mahayana Buddhism, and Mahayana Buddhism is the great vehicle. But what is it a vehicle for? It is the vehicle to truly realize who one is as a human being. And based on that, wherever my father saw the need among human beings, as a human being, in relation to other people, and in relation to other creatures, in his own limited way, he did the best he could to reach out. Not to another person because they were Buddhist, because they were Christian, because they were atheist, but because they were human So, as was referenced in the generous introduction by President Matsumoto, my father taught for 35 years at Smith College in Northampton, Massachusetts. And early in his career, which I found out much later, there was a couple who were students at Smith College who approached him. I think this was about 1976. Actually, Jeff Wilson, who is here, probably knows the year better than I do because he documented this in his wonderful book. But two students approached my father and asked if he would perform a wedding ceremony for them. And without hesitation, he agreed, even though at that time, this wedding would not be allowed legally. But he said, that's not important, because the real meaning of your union is spiritual and is a path of commitment. So at that time, he performed this wedding for this gay couple. But he never talked about these various efforts that he made, because it wasn't something special that he did, but because it was something he did as a human being. My father said, when I first went to college, it didn't feel like going to college. I said, why, Dad? Because, well, what our family could afford was for me to go to Marysville Junior College. And it didn't feel like going to college because it was in the same building as the high school. But after 2 years there, he finished, was able to transfer to University of California at Berkeley. I said, what did you major? He said, English literature. I said, what did you study? He said, Chaucer. My father passed in 2014 at the age of 85, and until about the age of 82 or 3, he could recite Chaucer in Middle English. After that, his short-term memory, which had already begun to fade a little bit, encroached a little bit more, and he couldn't recite as much Chaucer as before. Reason I relate that story, he's very, very accomplished in his scholarship, in Buddhist studies. He was very proud, and rightly so. He was a pioneer in the field of Buddhist studies, Shin Buddhist studies. And I wondered what it would be like when he retired, when he might not have as great a command intellectually, when he moved to be with us here in Eugene, Oregon, after living 35 years as a prominent professor at Smith College, but also known here in the US and Japan. When he came here, and he could no longer recite Chaucer, and he could no longer explain difficult passages in classical Japanese or Chinese, there was no hesitation. There was no regret. There was no awkwardness. In the 7 years that he lived here, I never heard him complain once. And I think that's because his fundamental identity was not as a scholar, but it was as a Shin Buddhist, but more fundamentally as just this human being. During the time that he was here, we had monthly Dharma gatherings. And he was no longer physically and in some ways intellectually as capable of leading the event. So it was just a small family Dharma with a few friends. We would gather. So I would lead the service. I would chant. But he was the senior person. So I would defer and I would say, Dad, do you have a Dharma message for us? And he could still present the Dharma in a cogent and deep way. But of all of the Dharma messages that he shared with us over the years here, there's only one that I remember. I said, Dad, do you have a message for us? And he said, yeah. I said, what is it? He said, it's good to be alive. We use expressions such as gratitude, interdependence, compassion. But for all his learning, for all his scholarship, for all his ability to express the Buddha Dharma in ordinary English and communicate that to a broad audience, I think for me, those words captured the essence of who he was. But he would not have been able to express that without all of the scholarship he did, all of the many years he toiled, the fruit of who he became, not because of what he knew, but because of what he did. And not because of what he did in a way that was outwardly recognizable, but who he was as a person. Lastly, I would just like to express my appreciation, not just to everyone in the BCA and the IBS and everyone who has come here, but also a word of thanks on behalf of the entire Unno family, but also as the son of Taitetsu Unno and the grandson of Reverend Enryo Unno, a thanks to the extended family. Because it took the whole family for my grandfather and my grandmother to carry out the ministerial work that they did. It took the help not just of my uncle and my father as the ordained, but all the brothers and sisters. As in many immigrant families, as in many Japanese American families, they all had to stick together and make sacrifices and contribute to the family project, part of which was so that my father could do his work as a professor and a minister. So on the one hand, I thank all of you on behalf of the Unno family, but at the same time, I also want to thank the extended Unno family. Thank you once again, Reverend Dr. Ken Tanaka, President David Matsumoto, Dean Scott Mitchell, Bishop Marvin Harada. Thank you